He was a beloved preacher. She was a quiet, soft-spoken mother. Together they were seen as the perfect couple in a deeply religious town. But on one ordinary morning, everything shattered. A gunshot echoed through their home, and only one of them would walk out alive. What happened behind the closed doors of the Winkler family? Was it a tragic accident, or the climax of a long, hidden nightmare? Let's unravel the haunting truth behind one of the most shocking cases of domestic turmoil in modern American history. Matthew Winkler was born in November 1974 and was the youngest child in his family. He had a brother named Daniel. The family lived in Huntington, Tennessee, USA, a small town with fewer than 5,000 residents, known for its long history of serving the church. Matthew's grandfather was a significant figure in the community, serving as a third-generation Christian minister and the principal of a preaching school in the town. He also authored several books on biblical theology. Matthew's father was also a pastor, and the Winkler family was highly respected in society due to their deep religious commitment. Matthew's father, Dan, began his career 5 years after Matthew was born. While still in high school, he started building a small church, which he completed during his college years. After graduating from university, he became a pastor and met his future wife, Diana. They married in 1970 and later had 2 sons. Due to Dan's preaching duties, the family frequently moved, even across state lines, which helped shape their character. Eventually, the Winkler family settled in Austin, Texas. Matthew attended high school regularly and was an athletic teenager who loved football and exercised almost daily. He was active, energetic, and creative, participating in church puppet shows. Matthew was kind and popular among his classmates. After graduating, his parents encouraged him to serve in the church, marking his first steps toward becoming a pastor. He later enrolled at Freed-Hardeman College in Tennessee. The Winkler family was generally happy, though Dan enforced strict household rules, which were considered appropriate for raising 2 sons. In 1993, the family moved again, this time to a large city in New York State, where Dan served as a missionary for 11 years. A few months after the move, Matthew met Mary, a modest yet charming university student. Mary was a year older than Matthew. Their relationship developed quickly, and they began dating. Just 3 months later, Mary introduced Matthew to her parents. The meeting went well. Matthew impressed her devout family, who approved of the relationship. 6 months later, he proposed, and Mary accepted. They were married on April 20th, 1994. Mary Freeman was born in 1973 as the eldest child in her family, who lived in the United States at the time. Her family was devoutly religious and regularly attended the Church of Christ, where her father served as the pastor. Later, the family welcomed a second daughter, Patricia, who faced serious health issues, including cerebral palsy, spinal meningitis, and developmental disabilities. Despite these challenges, her parents were committed to supporting her and taught her to read, although she struggled with comprehension. Mary and Patricia shared a very close bond. Mary, who was calm, reserved, obedient, and somewhat meek, often slept beside Patricia to comfort her. While Mary was in elementary school, her parents adopted a young girl named Shauna. Shauna came from a large family of 5 siblings, all of whom were placed with different adoptive families. Eventually, all the siblings, including Shauna, were returned to their biological parents. Mary experienced her first major trauma on April 15, 1987, when her younger sister died of a heart attack while taking a bath at the age of 11. This devastating loss affected Mary deeply. At 13, she sought help from a school psychologist to cope with her grief. Unfortunately, when her father found out, he became angry and insisted that the psychologist stop interfering, believing he and his wife should handle the situation themselves. As a result, Mary lacked emotional support from her parents, which contributed to the development of post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychological struggles that affected her throughout her life. Later, the family adopted 11-year-old Shannon and her 4 siblings, fulfilling their dream of having a large family. As the eldest, Mary took on a supportive role, helping her mother and guiding her younger siblings. It was during this time that Mary met Matthew and their romance began. They began dating and often skipped school to spend time together. When they found out that Mary was pregnant, they decided to drop out of school. They got married and moved to Knoxville, where they lived in a small apartment near Mary's parents. Matthew found work at a construction site. During this time, he felt exhausted by the physical demands of the job and the growing challenges in their marriage. He began to take his stress out on Mary. He resented her for dropping out of school and for the difficult situation they were in, especially while his friends were living carefree lives. To support his family, Matthew had to work hard. Eventually, he quit his job and began looking for work closer to home. During this period, Mary faced additional challenges when her mother was diagnosed with cancer. Despite the support of her family and specialized treatment, her mother sadly passed away in April 1999. The loss had a profound effect on the entire family. Mary's father was left to care for 5 children on his own, and her adopted siblings began to rely on Mary for more help. Although she supported them as much as she could, her time and energy were limited. She was pregnant with her 2nd child and caring for a newborn. In June 1999, the Winklers began searching for a home. With limited financial resources, they bought a small, modest house that was still under construction in the small town of Pegram, which had a population of just 2,000. The town was located 15 kilometers from the church, where Matthew had secured a job as a pastor. The family moved in, preparing for the birth of their 2nd daughter. During this time, Mary began to experience postpartum depression and faced many challenges. Along with raising her own children, she also cared for her foster siblings, who were often demanding and difficult. This added strain frustrated both Mary and Matthew. Over time, she began to withdraw from her relatives, possibly due to the constant pressure from her husband and the responsibility of caring for her siblings. A family friend described Mary as modest, shy, homely, and somewhat peculiar. She struggled with social interactions, had a small circle of friends, and tended to be reserved. She also experienced unpredictable mood swings, which sometimes upset her husband. Mary began to speak about experiencing sexual abuse from Matthew. However, he didn't see his behavior as problematic. Instead, he believed that Mary's rigidity and lack of intimacy were to blame. After a particularly tense argument, Mary invited her 2 brothers to stay overnight because she felt unsafe being alone with Matthew. During that time, Matthew decided that they needed to distance themselves from her family to reduce their influence on his household. After the move, their marriage began to show signs of improvement. Mary described the transition as difficult, but felt relieved that they had worked through their issues. The couple bought a house in the small town of Mark Menville. At the time, Mary was pregnant again and excited about the idea of having a large family, like the one she had grown up in. Unfortunately, she later suffered a miscarriage. In their new town, the family met kind neighbors. Matthew's pastoral career was thriving, though it required frequent travel, leaving him often away from home. He looked forward to a promotion to lead pastor at the local church. Meanwhile, Mary took a part-time job to help support the family financially. Matthew also worked part-time teaching Bible lessons at Boyd Christian School. He was respected as a knowledgeable teacher and was seen as a positive influence, instilling strong religious values in his congregation. He earned the respect of the broader community. However, Those who worked closely with him began to notice another side. He was often arrogant and created tension in the workplace. Mary brought him lunch every day, and although she was attentive, Matthew treated her with disdain. This behavior upset his secretary, who felt it was unacceptable conduct for a man of his faith. No one suspected that Matthew might be abusive at home. Behind closed doors, he mistreated Mary. This continued until one day she showed up with a black eye, raising concern in the community. She claimed it was an accident, but refused to explain how it happened. Rumors began to spread that Matthew was harming her, possibly even sexually, and that he was struggling with addiction, which became a topic of whispered conversation within the community. It's unclear whether this contributed to Matthew's professional downfall, but in 2004, he lost his job as a church pastor. A more reputable preacher was hired to take his place, which sent Matthew into a frenzy as he was forced to search for work once again. The Winkler family relocated to a new city to start over. There, Matthew found a position at a local church, and Mary was pregnant with another baby girl. However, the transition was not without its challenges. Soon after moving in, conflicts arose with the neighbors over a nearby dog. Mary was concerned that the dog might bite her children and even threatened to shoot it, which caused tension with the neighbors. Meanwhile, at his new job, Matthew's behavior changed significantly. At church, he was seen as polite, caring, and a loving husband, admired as the head of a model family. For a while, he managed to uphold this positive image. Brett Glenn, a close family friend, remained supportive of Matthew during this time. While attending Brett's wedding anniversary celebration, Matthew noticed that Brett's family had purchased a pistol for self-defense. This prompted him to consider doing the same. He later took Mary to a shooting range to learn how to use a firearm. However, not long after, strange events began to unfold within the Winkler family. After giving birth, Mary enrolled in a teacher training program at the university. She hoped to get an education and eventually find a job caring for sick children. On December 1, 2005, Mary received what appeared to be a lottery prize check. Needing money to pay her insurance premiums, she took out a loan while waiting for the funds to arrive, and even secured another loan from the bank. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a scam. The check was fake. Desperate for money, Mary attempted to commit financial fraud in hopes of obtaining $6,500. However, her scheme was too naive and was eventually uncovered. By February 2006, she realized the transaction had been declined. She contacted the bank and changed the mailing address on the account to a rented post office box, suggesting a premeditated intent to commit fraud. She then opened a new bank account using only her cell phone number and the P.O. box as contact information. With just $100 in the new account, she tried to withdraw $7,000 to cover her previous debt. She also redirected all her mail to the rented box. Meanwhile, Matthew received praise from his father for their improved financial situation, completely unaware of the financial chaos Mary was causing. They had nearly paid off their debts, thanks in part to compensation from an accident a few months earlier. Ironically, as Matthew worked hard to improve their finances, Mary's fraudulent actions were making things worse. The following day, the bank contacted Mary to inform her that the transaction was illegal and that there were insufficient funds to process the withdrawal. They requested that she come to the branch with her husband to speak with the manager and resolve the issue. Rather than discussing it with Matthew, Mary chose to remain silent. A bank employee suggested she take out a $5,000 loan to cover the shortfall and move on from the situation. However, since the account was joint, she needed her husband's approval, so she left without taking any action. Later, the bank reached out again, warning Mary that if she didn't resolve the issue soon, she could face criminal charges for fraud. They reiterated the loan option as a way to clear the counterfeit check debt. Mary said she would consider it, but as she was still contemplating her next move, a tragic event occurred on March 22, 2006. The Winkler family was expected to attend church services along with the congregation, and their 3 daughters were supposed to join the other children. However, when the time came, the entire family was absent. This raised immediate suspicions, as the pastor's family was known for never missing important events. After a brief wait, one of the elders called their home, but no one answered, an unusual occurrence for a minister's household. Adding to the concern, Matthew was scheduled to deliver an important sermon that day, making his absence even more alarming. A church minister went to Matthew and Mary's home to check on them. The lights were on, and the TV was blaring, but there was no response to his knocks or calls. He tried peering through the windows, but couldn't see anything. Concerned, he sought help from neighbors and fellow church members. Eventually, they found a set of spare keys in a shed on the property. Around 9 p.m., they finally managed to open the door. What they discovered inside shocked them. In the couple's bedroom, Matthew's body was found lying on the floor in a pool of blood. The pastors immediately called 911. Police and emergency medical responders arrived at the scene shortly afterward. Doctors confirmed that Matthew was dead. Forensic experts began processing the scene, but because several people had entered the house before police arrived, the site was heavily contaminated, making evidence collection difficult. Meanwhile, Mary and the children were missing, and the family's vehicle was also gone. Initially, police suspected that Mary and the children might have been kidnapped and were in danger. No one could have imagined what had truly happened in that house. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had died from a fatal shotgun wound to the chest and had bled to death. As the investigation progressed, authorities uncovered Mary's involvement in financial fraud, which severely damaged her reputation. Public perception of her quickly shifted. She was now viewed as both a potential victim and a criminal. She, her daughters, and the family's car were added to a nationwide watch list. Police tracked Mary's mobile phone and discovered she was in Orange Beach, Alabama, approximately 600 kilometers from the crime scene. Law enforcement in that area was alerted and began working to locate her. On March 23, around 7:30 p.m., a police officer noticed a minivan making an illegal U-turn. 3 police cars surrounded the vehicle in a grocery store parking lot. Officers approached cautiously, fearing the children might still be in danger or that Mary had been abducted. However, Mary was driving the minivan herself and was promptly arrested. She listened to the officer read her rights with a blank expression and was taken to the station, accompanied by her children. In the back seat of the vehicle, police found a 12-gauge shotgun, the weapon used to kill Matthew. Her daughters appeared deeply frightened and confused. Mary gave officers the contact information for her relatives, so arrangements could be made for the care of her children while she was in custody. She was charged with check fraud and began explaining the events surrounding her husband's death. Just one day after her arrest, Mary gave a statement. She claimed that the night before, she and Matthew had a minor argument that ended with them sleeping in separate rooms. At some point, she retrieved a gun that Matthew had kept in the closet for home protection. Mary said her memory was hazy, almost as if she had experienced amnesia. She remembered hearing a noise and seeing her husband fall out of bed, gasping for air and bleeding. She couldn't recall how she got the gun or how the shooting happened. The entire incident was a blur to her. 5 months after her arrest, Mary's father mortgaged his home to pay her $750,000 bail. After her release, she moved to Tennessee and began working at a dry cleaner while awaiting trial. Prosecutors argued that Mary had planned the murder in advance. They presented evidence showing that she had disabled Matthew's cell phone, preventing him from calling for help, and that he had died from blood loss. Mary knew the locations of firearms in the house and had easy access to them. A handgun was identified as the murder weapon. Yet, the motive behind the killing remains unclear. How Mary, once quiet, gentle, and devout, could commit such an act puzzled both investigators and the local community. Meanwhile, many residents continued to view Matthew as a holy man, making the tragedy all the more difficult to comprehend. The children stated that Matthew was a good father who had never harmed them or their mother. They had never witnessed any arguments between their parents. One day, they were awakened by a loud noise and went to investigate. As they turned the corner in the hallway, they saw their father lying on the floor. However, their mother quickly closed the door in front of them, leaving the girls confused about what had happened. The prosecution alleged that Mary was experiencing serious financial difficulties, which she had tried to hide from her husband. This deception was difficult to maintain, as he would eventually discover the truth when reviewing their bills. It was believed that Matthew either uncovered her fraud and was shot as a result, or that Mary planned to kill him to prevent him from finding out. During the investigation, it was revealed that the check fraud wasn't Mary's only illegal activity. She had submitted fake documents to 5 banks, committing scams totaling $17,500. This type of fraud, known as check kiting, involves artificially inflating the balance of a bank account to access funds that don't exist. Bank employees confirmed that they had repeatedly requested Mary and her husband meet with branch managers to resolve the issue of missing money. None of the banks reported her to the police, as they initially hoped to settle the matter privately. However, Mary ignored their requests, determined to keep her financial troubles hidden from her husband. During the trial, Mary denied having confessed to murdering her husband, claiming she was in a state of shock at the time. Her attorneys argued that Matthew was a domestic abuser who not only assaulted her, but also raped her and pressured her into committing financial fraud. A key point in her defense centered on the murder weapon. They argued that loading the shotgun would have made a loud noise, which would likely have awakened her husband, suggesting that the gun had already been loaded prior to the incident. According to the defense, Mary, unaware the gun was ready to fire, had simply grabbed it to threaten him. Tragically, the weapon discharged, killing her husband. The defense maintained that the shooting was accidental. The case raised a crucial question. Why would a loving wife point a loaded gun at her sleeping husband, even if only to intimidate him? In court, Mary shared the harrowing experiences she endured while living with a man she described as a domestic tyrant. She accused Matthew of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. To support her claims, Mary brought to court a wig and a pair of high-heeled shoes that she said Matthew forced her to wear. Upon seeing them again, she broke down in tears. Mary testified that Matthew's controlling behavior extended to her appearance, forcing her to wear revealing clothing and watch adult films, even pressuring her into intimate acts that were uncomfortable for her. He required her to ask for permission just to get a haircut. Despite these humiliations, she kept her shame and fear to herself, hiding the truth about her marriage. She described a home life in which Matthew enforced strict rules and punished her harshly for the smallest mistakes. She even feared he might have been harming their children. Over time, resentment began to build inside her. On the morning of the incident, Mary was awakened around 6 a.m. by the sound of her youngest daughter crying. Frustrated, Matthew angrily pulled Mary out of bed, insisting that she go soothe the child. Mary complied and went to the nursery, but the baby continued to cry, further upsetting Matthew. He stormed into the room, picked up the baby, and covered her mouth and nose to silence her. Terrified for her daughter's safety, Mary begged him to give the child back. Eventually, he returned the baby to her and walked back to the bedroom. Mary calmed her daughter and put her back to sleep. Then she took the shotgun to confront Matthew, but accidentally fired it, fatally shooting him. At first, Mary was disoriented and didn't fully comprehend what had happened. She saw her husband fall from the bed and hit his head. Afraid that he had merely fallen and would now be enraged, she quickly left the bedroom. Listening for signs that he might be following her, she realized it was silent. When she returned to the bedroom, she understood the gravity of what had happened. She had shot Matthew. In a state of panic, she gathered the children and fled the house. Mary explained that she had lost control and shot her husband in a fit of rage due to his violent behavior toward her and their children. She claimed that after he attacked them, he went to sleep, and in that moment of anguish, she accidentally shot him. However, the prosecution rejected her version of events, arguing that her testimony was implausible and inconsistent with what she had initially told investigators. They believed Mary had killed Matthew to prevent him from discovering her financial fraud. The jury was presented with numerous documents and witness testimonies and had to consider several possible sentencing options for Mary Freeman. The lightest sentence was 1 year in prison, while the harshest was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She also faced the potential loss of parental rights. After about 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict on April 19, 2007, finding Mary guilty of manslaughter, a charge that carried a penalty between the minimum and maximum sentencing options. While the case was awaiting the final verdict from the judge, it was expected that Mary would receive at least 6 years in prison. However, the judge's ruling came as a surprise. Mary Freeman was sentenced to just 210 days in jail, with the 5 months she had already spent in custody before the trial credited toward that sentence. Afterward, she was ordered to spend 60 days in a mental health facility before being released. The judge and jury justified the lenient sentence by stating that they believed Mary was a victim of domestic abuse who had been pushed to her breaking point. Many local residents shared this belief, especially after Mary recounted how her husband had forced her to wear stripper shoes, an image that deeply resonated with and disturbed the women in the small community, many of whom voiced their support for her. The prosecution, however, strongly disagreed with the verdict. They maintained that the killing was premeditated, arguing that Mary had deliberately retrieved a loaded gun, entered the bedroom without being in immediate danger, and intentionally shot her husband. Despite their arguments, the court rejected all appeals and refused to reconsider the case. The decision sparked widespread criticism and public outrage, particularly among Matthew's relatives, who believed justice had not been served. In August 2008, Mary was awarded full custody of her 3 daughters, who had been living with Matthew's parents. A custody battle ensued, with his relatives arguing that Mary was an unfit mother because she had killed their son and had a history of anger issues. They feared she might become violent again. However, their arguments failed to sway the court, and custody was granted to Mary. She was never charged with any additional crimes related to Matthew's death, and it was implied by some that she had been coerced into committing the act. Mary worked for a time at a dry cleaner and later at a daycare near McMinnville. Unfortunately, neither job lasted long due to ongoing public and media scrutiny. Today, Mary is 50 years old. She lives a reclusive life, and her current whereabouts are unknown. In the end, the story of Matthew and Mary Winkler is not just about a crime. It's a heartbreaking tale of love, control, silence, and the fragile line between devotion and desperation. From the outside, they lived a life rooted in faith and family values. But behind closed doors, a storm had long been brewing, one that neither church nor community could see coming. Was Mary a battered wife, slowly crumbling under years of psychological torment? Or was she a manipulator who masked her intentions beneath a veil of innocence? The courtroom reached a verdict, but the court of public opinion remains divided. Some see her as a symbol of quiet suffering, others as a chilling reminder of how far someone might go to escape the consequences of their own deception. Years have passed, yet the shadows of that fateful morning still linger. The children have grown, the headlines have faded, but the scars, both visible and hidden, endure. Perhaps we may never know the full truth, but what this story leaves behind is a sobering lesson. Even in places where faith runs deep and families seem whole, darkness can dwell just beneath the surface.